To desire immortality is to desire the eternal perpetuation of a great mistake. This quote from Schopenhauer insinuates that existence itself is a mistake. And although I don't necessarily agree with that notion, there is another part of this quote that I want to expand on here. Something that I've touched on in some of my artworks and animations, and that topic is the perpetuation of our existence and our desire for immortality. Because these days, we might have already reached immortality, but at what cost? Hello, everyone. I am Ginger Potter, and this is my first attempt at expanding on my art and the themes I explore in my work, with the goal of having a wider conversation and discussion with all of you, and I hope you come aboard and join me along on this journey. This video's topic revolves around immortality and how we may have essentially already reached it, or at least a form of it. This animation was the first artwork where I began delving into this idea. You see my character falling into a grave, yet there is a pixeled shadow of him still standing where he once did. This pixel shadow is a representation of what I'm trying to touch on here, and is somewhat the latest form of man's endless search for immortality. A search that has spanned over thousands of years and has been desired by billions throughout history. Some sought it in a literal sense through magical remedies or searching for the fountain of youth, for example, while others pursued it in more meaningful and realistic ways, by trying to leave a mark so large in history that we still speak of them thousands of years after their physical selves have become dust. Whether through conquest, art, sculptures, or writings, people have always tried to create things that leave their mark on time. But as we evolved and technology evolved with us, the mediums that record our achievements, ideas, and creations evolved as well. They became far more sophisticated and more accurate in how they capture us, like our voices through radio, for example, and eventually our likeness through pictures, television, and so on. But as this technology continued evolving into our modern day, and the occasional recording of our voices and likeness became a daily practice through our phones, we have now reached a point where there aren't just fragments of who we were left behind after we die, but rather whole archives. Archives that capture what we looked like, how we sounded, how we moved, what we thought about, and what we liked to talk about. And although it is somewhat heartwarming to be able to preserve a version of ourselves that we can look back on and that our descendants can look at and understand what we might have been like in a very real audiovisual sense, I kind of like to think of it as the closest thing to a time machine that we currently have. But there is a concern that arises when this archive stops being just a source of preservation and starts becoming a source of replication. This is a hologram of Michael Jackson performing about a year after he passed away. The man was buried, yet there he was on stage, moving, singing, and performing to the song Slave to the Rhythm, no less. Now looking back at it today, it does have that somewhat CGI, uncanny feel. But at the time, this hologram did look very realistic, and I couldn't help but wonder, would Michael have wanted this? To have his likeness continue performing without his agency or approval? And that question extends to anyone really. Would I want my likeness to continue on performing and doing things beyond my own decision-making and agency? I'm not so sure. But then again, this was just a one-time tribute show for someone who was extremely documented and archived throughout his life. It doesn't necessarily extend to the general public now, does it? And we have seen multiple recreations of likeness in other medias throughout the years since. And it's just a form of entertainment that to a certain extent has approval from the estate of these deceased individuals and is within a very limited capacity of them just playing a character they're known for, as opposed to representing the actual deceased person beyond the grave. But as this tech keeps on evolving faster and faster and appears more frequently and realistically as time passes, I wonder how long will it be before that line blurs, and if it might be implemented eventually on the general public. After all, in the last decade, most of us have documented and archived ourselves more than any generation before us, broadcasting ourselves to the entire world through the internet. But our likeness can be used like Michael's was, right? To instead of being a slave to the rhythm, be a slave to, let's say, an algorithm, right? So a few weeks ago, this headline appeared in my feed, where Meta announced that they had applied for a patent for an AI that essentially learns the behaviors of its users and continues their activity far after they've died. And aside from having the same reaction that a lot of people did when it came out,
Something like this is a fucking horrible thing.
it immediately reminded me of my artwork again that I had created just a few years earlier. Suddenly, it felt even more relevant today because we do seem to be heading in this direction where a digital version of us might live on beyond our physical selves. Immortality, or at least a version of immortality, achieved, where the body decays, yet the likeness remains, trained on the patterns of behavior we displayed while we were alive. And the logical next question to this is, what happens when the copy continues without the original? How does it react to situations the original person never faced? And at what point does this digital copy begin to drift away from the person it was trained on? At first, it might just continue the same patterns of the person it's imitating, but it also might eventually start saying things the original might never have said, acting in ways that optimize engagement on the platform it is hosted on, rather than acting as the person actually would have, until eventually you end up with an avatar that looks like you, sounds like you, and acts like you, but behaves in ways you never would have. What begins as memorialization slowly turns into behavioral automation. At first glance, this might seem like the fulfillment of humanity's ancient wish, survival beyond the limits of the body. But what survives here isn't consciousness. It's a shell and a pattern. Not will, but approximation. Machine learning systems are not static archives. They adapt, they optimize, they refine tone and behavior based on feedback. Over time, a digital replica might diverge from the person it was originally trained on. It could become more extreme, more simplified, or simply more commercially effective. And in that case, the copy doesn't just preserve identity, it reshapes it, which leads to a deeper question. Can something really be considered an extension of the self if it operates independently from the self's intentions? Immortality has traditionally implied the persistence of an individual's essence, but informational persistence without agency might represent something else entirely. The body is finite. Biological mortality ensures that each life has boundaries. Digital systems operate differently, though. They function through indefinite storage and continuous reproduction. Once a likeness enters global data networks, it can be recombined, trained on, and redistributed beyond the control of the person who created it. And what emerges is not simply remembrance. One might argue that this is simply the next evolution of human expression. Writing and art preserved internal thoughts and memory. Photography and video recordings preserved external memory. Artificial intelligence may simply be preserving behavioral memory and identity that links the previous two in a complete picture of the individual. But there's an important difference between preserving memory and recreating identity. If something continues speaking in your name long after you're gone and begins evolving beyond your beliefs, values, or intentions, then what persists is not truly you now, is it? It is the shell of expression without the living subject behind it. To endure as data may not be the same as enduring as a self. Sure, a version of us might exist in a time we were never meant to exist in, but would we really want that? Not to mention that mortality has historically acted as a boundary that protects authorship. When a life ends, interpretation begins. But in digital environments, interpretation can turn into ongoing production. The line between memory and manufacture begins to blur. If immortality has been achieved in informational form, then it may be an immortality without sovereignty, where someone can argue that, well, this copy is trained on the original, so the original might have most likely acted in the way the copy did, even if the copy's actions eventually completely oppose most of the original's principles, essentially, gradually and seamlessly reshaping and distorting the identity of the original, until the copy represents someone completely different, yet that still looks and sounds like the original. But there could be an argument, though, that a faithful copy would clarify and clear future misinterpretations, which leads me to the main issue here, of how that depends completely on who controls this copy and what incentives is driving it. And in our current modern world, driven by monetary, commercial, and engagement incentives, it seems like there is a lot of room for distortion of the original's principles as opposed to staying true to them. At the beginning of the video, I said that we may have reached immortality. We may not have conquered death biologically, but instead we may have created systems capable of perpetuating behavioral likeness indefinitely. The real question is not whether this is possible. It increasingly is. The question is whether persistence without agency is something that we would want. If existing, even as a shell, far beyond our time is better than not existing at all. Or if that form of existence ironically leads to our own erasure. as the copy overrides the memory of the original, leading to the question if future generations will remember individuals as they were or as their digital shadows became. And that is a rather unsettling thought, as in the pursuit to preserve who we are, we might create a version of ourselves that might look and sound and act like us, but do things we might never have done, and potentially do things completely against our principles. But as this digital version of us eternally lives on, while our real selves lay increasingly forgotten in a grave, there could come a time where the deeds of our digital copy outweighs our own deeds, and our likeness will only be remembered for things our actual selves never did or even approved of. And I'm not sure what to make of all this. And if I should care about a hypothetical version of me still roaming around the world long after I've died, since I would be dead, but as someone that does care about my legacy, I do want to be remembered as I am and for the things that I've done, rather than what a copy that looks, sounds, and acts like me becomes. I'm not even sure how one can combat this, since being in our modern age with the increasing need to broadcast ourselves online and add to those archives, much like how I'm doing right now, where the primary place to share ideas and thoughts has become through this form of broadcasting, where it's increasingly becoming essential to do so, and me being part of it, I don't know how one can preserve and protect their identity and who they were after they pass on and no longer have control of it. Would maybe laws around authorship need to be extended to identity and be taken more seriously, as opposed to how it feels right now, like we are sleepwalking our way into giving up control of our identities to big corporations like Meta after we pass on? Or would those laws just delay the inevitable, as there's no practical way of stopping this? Where we might as well embrace it and look at our likeness as a source of lucrative opportunities rather than something we should be overly protective of. But what do you think about this topic and about the overall video? Do you think this is simply the natural evolution of our species, something inevitable as technology advances? Or do you think there should be limitations that clearly distinguish between the person that once lived and their digital counterpart? If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more discussions like this one, let me know in the comments below. Also, I would love to see a discussion start around this topic between all of you to expand on the perspectives and the ideas that can come from it. I also have this artwork now available on Superrare. If anyone is interested in collecting it, feel free to message me on Instagram. And don't forget to follow me on my socials over here, especially on Twitter if you have that. Feel free to come aboard by subscribing and smashing that like button. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to look up.